call the roll, or whoever does that?
Yes. Chair David Smith,
Here.
Commissioner Carla,
Here.
Commissioner Brad Newman,
Here.
Commissioner Jim Ransko,
Present.
Commissioner Daniel Schweiker,
Present.
Commissioner Sharon Seitz,
Present.
and Commissioner Mark Stevens is absent because of a prior commitment. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jim, are you on the phone somewhere?
Yes, sir. I'm on the Microsoft Teams, so I can see everything, and obviously audio works.
Well, just holler if we ignore you at some point, and let us know you're there.
No problem.
This being our first meeting, I just wanted to take the liberty of making some brief remarks. And first of all, just to say good afternoon and welcome here for everyone in person or on screen or on the phone or whatever you're doing. This Budget Review Commission, as you know, was created by the council a month ago and assigned the responsibility to make recommendations on the city budget, the operating budget, the capital budget, revenues, as well as the policies that govern and measure our budget results. And the assignment is stated in just a few words, but I think the underlying goal is to give our council a reassurance that the budget is fiscally responsible. And that means that it provides, if you will, the highest level of service delivered in the most efficient, cost-effective way. More than that, I think we are expected to give the council our assurance that the budget ensures long-term fiscal sustainability, meaning that it properly assigns costs and benefits and doesn't kick the can down the road to future generations. It's also my hope that our assurances to the council will provide some reassurance to Scottsdale citizens, all you folks as well. And in doing so, we might help restore a degree of citizens' trust and faith in your city government, trust and faith that your taxes are assessed equitably and spent judiciously in accordance with citizen direction and expectations, all to improve the quality of life that we've come to expect of Scottsdale. So as we undertake this challenge, we invite residents to help. This is, after all, a Citizens Budget Review Commission, and you are the citizens that we'd like to hear from. We invite you to give us your opinion. We even invite constructive criticism, so you can be assured your voices will be heard. And at that point, I would ask if there is any public comment, if anyone has dared take the jump, the leap into telling us their opinion. Sonny has declined. Very well, we'll skip the public comment for tonight, but you are encouraged to make public comment in future meetings. And I should have read the speech here that comes with the public comment. It says, considering citizens may address the members of the Budget Review Commission regarding non-agendized items during public comment. Arizona state law prohibits the commission from discussing or taking action on an item that is not on the prepared agenda. And citizens may complete one request to speak public comment card per meeting. Don't get overexcited here. At any rate, you submit that to the city staff, and public testimony is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Written comment cards are also accepted for agendized items and may be submitted to city staff at any time. And cards submitted after public comment has begun for an item will be provided to the commission at the conclusion of the public comment for that item. Enough of the boilerplate. New business. I wanted to take a moment for everyone on our commission here to introduce themselves to one another as well as to the public. I'll start by saying I am David Smith. I have previously served on a budget review commission for Scottsdale back in 2009. And that and a variety of other things led to me eventually choosing to run for and being elected on the city council for one term. And I've probably made a pest of myself at various times since then. My career before Scottsdale was in corporate finance with a variety of companies, but significantly and relevant to the assignment here. Two of them were governmental agencies, the Tennessee Valley Authority and Amtrak, both of which I was the CFO for, so I'm not unfamiliar with the uniqueness of government accounting and the uniqueness of government assignments. We don't produce a product, we provide a service, and we don't sell a product for profit. We hope that citizens recognize the value of the service they get from the taxes they pay. That's me. Sharon Seitz, why don't you start by introducing yourself?
Sharon Seitz. At present, I own and operate the Sphinx State Company store on Scottsdale Road, if anybody's been in for a date shake. My professional career was in financial planning and budgeting. I worked for a number of government agencies, the City of Phoenix, the State of Arizona Joint Legislative Budget Committee, worked as CFO for a few private companies, and also worked in financial planning at Amtrak, capital improvement projects, as well as the operating budgets. I look forward to learning so much more about what goes on in the Scottsdale budget, and appreciate being here.
If her mention of Amtrak sounded familiar, it is true. We were both there at the same time.
My name is Dan Schweiker, and I'm somewhat familiar with city financial government. I spent 12 years in the Paradise Valley Town Council. I also co-founded China Mist Tea Company, which was Scottsdale-based, and ran that for 35 years. Sold it 8 years ago and tried to retire. Apparently, I've flunked retirement 101 several times now. But I'm looking forward to learning more about how to keep Scottsdale great, because my wife and I relocated here about 11 years ago. Absolutely love it. No other place I'd rather be. And looks like we have a good group of people up here, and I'm just interested in learning more and hearing from people.
Hi, my name is Brad Newman. Retired to Scottsdale 5 years ago in 2020 after 17 years in Chicago and 13 years in Indianapolis before that. Spent 30 years in the pharmaceutical industry, medical devices, hospital products, and my public life was maybe limited to the HOAs that I lived in before this, but this is my first time on a budget commission, and so I'm very much looking forward to working to help keep Scottsdale great. Thank you.
I'm Carla, and yes, eons ago, getting divorced, I did legally take one name as my personal declaration of independence, so that's not an error up front. I am one of the City of Scottsdale's 12 preserve pioneers. I've lived here going on 61 years, the last 36 over in Peaceful Valley. I used to co-own and manage a small business and was executive director of the McDowell-Sonoran Conservancy, the nonprofit, for 10 years. I've served on many of the city's boards and commissions, and I'm thrilled to be on this one because I think we really need to, as Chairman Smith said, open things back up again and help restore faith, and I look forward to that.
I can go. My name is Jim Ransco. This is my first adventure into city service. I'm a serial entrepreneur who's been living in Scottsdale in and out for the last 36 years. Been busy founding, scaling, and managing various businesses, mostly in the architecture, construction, and real estate industries. And I'm just really glad to be able to serve and look forward to meeting all of you in person at our next meeting.
Thank you, Jim. And Mark Stevens, will give him a chance to introduce himself more fully when he is here with us at the next meeting, but I will tell you in advance, he's a long-term resident of Scottsdale, was the managing partner for, I think, Ernst & Young, and so comes with obviously a considerable amount of financial expertise. So this is your team. And with that, we go on to item 2, which is to adopt a set of bylaws to govern our behaviors here. You all have a copy of the bylaws provided to you. If you have any questions, raise them now, either for me or for our attorney joining us here, Sherry Scott. Maybe you have any questions? Seeing no questions, I need a motion to adopt the bylaws, and
Motion to adopt the bylaws as written.
Commissioner Schweiker makes a motion to adopt the bylaws as written,
Yes.
You want a second?
and somebody seconded. We'll give Commissioner Seitz the credit for seconding it. I think Jim may have been on the phone too, but anyway, their motion made and seconded. If you all know how to push your button on yes or no, do so and record your vote. And Commissioner Ransko will ask verbally, do you vote yes or no?
I vote yes.
So recorded. The vote is 6, it's unanimous, 6-0. Third item of business is the appointment of vice chair, which is provided for in the bylaws, and I do it. So I would appoint Commissioner Schweiker for the esteemed position of vice chair. And I don't think that requires any action except maybe a thank you from Commissioner Schweiker. If you want to make any comments, you're welcome to do so.
I'm not sure it's a thank you, but I will gratefully accept it.
The fourth item of business is to approve a meeting calendar. You all were given a meeting calendar of tentative dates by staff. And by the way, I should introduce, for the benefit of everybody, the staff that's here. I mentioned Sherry Scott from our legal department. She is the city's legal counsel. Acting city attorney, Greg Cato. How do you pronounce your name?
Caton.
Okay, join us. And Sonia Andrews, who is the city treasurer for the city. So we have a high-powered bunch of staff here today to keep us on the straight and narrow. But Sonia, as I said, gave a list of tentative meeting dates, and I would only say as a preamble to this, there's not much time between now and when we are expected to give opinions and thoughts and ideas and our final report to council before they adopt the proposed budget. The date for the adoption of the proposed budget is May the 6th. And so sometime before that, we have to have our thoughts together and perhaps have had a joint session with them to share those thoughts. The last meeting on this schedule is April 24, listed as an optional meeting, but it may be subsumed by some meeting with the council to share our thoughts in a joint meeting. But at any rate, looking at this list and recognizing that we may have dates that we add, I don't imagine we'll subtract any, but dates that we add for meetings. Does anybody have any comments about this? And I recognize from time to time, one or more people will not be able to make a meeting, and we will just march ahead as best we can. I see Commissioner Carley, you have a comment?
Had a question for staff. Is it the joint meeting, the work study with the mayor and council? and recognize that Mayor Borowski's in the audience now. Is it most likely going to be a Tuesday?
Commissioner Smith, Commissioners, we do not have that date nailed down yet, and we will probably get that to you as soon as we can.
Okay, thank you.
As you can imagine, getting 14 people on the same page for a joint meeting will be a challenge, but we'll give it a shot. Any other comments on this schedule? If not, why don't I entertain a motion to approve the schedule as it is, knowing, as I said, that it will undoubtedly change as we march through time. Do I have a motion? Commissioner Seitz.
I will move to approve
Thank you. And a
the
second.
meeting calendar.
I'll second.
Second from Commissioner Schweiker. Let's vote. And Commissioner Ransko, do you vote in the affirmative?
I do. Thank you.
So it again is unanimous, 6-0. The next item on the agenda is the presentation overview of our city budget components, the budget process, the timeline. And Sonia, I think, has provided a handout which will undoubtedly appear on the screen as she talks. I'll turn it over to you, Sonia.
Thank you. So what I'd like to do for you today to start this meeting off is to provide you a high-level overview of the city's budget process, all the steps or components that goes into the budget, and also a high-level overview of our funds and departments and how the city's budget is structured. Next slide. So the city's budget is a very important document because it is the city's financial plan. It provides the key strategic financial direction for the upcoming year. To that end, the city manager and city treasurer, we work together closely to bring a budget to council to approve funding for all the city's needs and priorities. The city manager is responsible for council priorities, making sure that the budget aligns with council priorities and operational goals. The city manager is also in charge of approving departmental budget requests, programs and service needs, rates and fees requests, and the capital infrastructure requests. The city treasurer's office and the budget office, we ensure compliance with budget policies and regulations. We look at financial strategies and work with the city manager's office to determine the right financial strategies. We do the revenue projections and also debt capacity and also determine any debt needs. We assist the departments with any calculations and we balance the budget. Next slide. So the city's budget process starts way back in October because there are many, many steps to putting a budget together. We start in October with what we call a baseline budget, and we determine the budget requests, revenue forecast. We work very closely with the departments on all their requests and do a lot of analysis on them. And then internally, we go through a series of reviews. We have an internal team that reviews capital projects, department requests, and all that. And then we have the city's executive team, which is our city manager and our assistant city managers, myself, reviewing all of these requests before it gets balanced and brought before now the Budget Review Commission and then the City Council. So there's plenty of steps that go into the whole budget process. Next slide. So as Chair Smith spoke earlier, it's a very tight timeline given that we have a Budget Review Commission this year. As we mentioned earlier, the budget process, development process starts in October. We're still working on it today. And then usually we are able to finalize our budget balancing and internal review by the end of March and beginning of April, where we release our proposed balanced budget. This year it'll be April 3rd. We will release that proposed balanced budget on April 3rd. And then what we will do is we will take the Budget Review Commission through our balanced budget in order to meet our presentation timeline with the City Council and our community, which we have scheduled for May 6th. And then, from the proposed budget, we will then hold public hearings and the adoption of the tentative budget on May 20th, with the final adoption on June 10th, and that is by charter. Our charter requires us to adopt our final budget on the first meeting in June. So it's a pretty tight timeline. Next slide. So as I mentioned, there's many components to putting a budget together. Kind of think of it as like multiple steps. And I'll take you through at a high level all these different steps. We start out with looking at our financial policies that govern the budget to see if there's any changes that need to be made. So we will be bringing to this Budget Commission a review of those financial policies. We then look to make sure that we have some alignment with council on organizational strategic plans. We do revenue projections, we're looking at economic trends and forecasts. We also then work with our departments, determine the rates and fees that will set certain revenues. We look at our debt capacity. We also look at our personnel requests and personnel cost assumptions and projections, working with our HR department and all the various departments on their personnel needs. Next slide. We also look at capital project requests and all the changes to the capital projects in the existing capital improvement plan. We identify funding for those projects. And of course, aside from personnel and capital, we look at all our other non-capital and non-personnel expenditure requests as well. We then also look at our reserve and contingency requirements for all of our departments and funds. We do calculate indirect cost allocations, and we do also determine transfers between funds. And we then produce 5-year revenue and expenditure forecasts for all of our major funds, the general fund and all of our other major funds. We then sit down with the city manager and our executive team to look at financial strategies and financial sustainability considerations, making sure that we do not have any structural imbalance in our budgets. And then, of course, we make sure we comply with state law requirements as well. So in a nutshell, these are all the components that we go through, and that's why the budget process starts way back in October, as we have to go through all of these steps in order to bring a balanced proposed budget for your review. Next slide. So I just kind of wanted to take a moment to share that the city has received the GFOA Distinguished Budget Award every year for over 30 years, and the GFOA Award basically looks at our the budget and our criteria, the policy document, the financial plan, and how our budget is put together. And the city has won this award for every year for the last over 30 years. Next slide. So our budget is put into 3 different components, if you might. We have the operating budget, we have the capital budget, and we have our 5-year capital improvement plan. Next slide. So starting with the operating budget, next slide. And given that we don't have current year preliminary numbers yet, I'm putting up here our current fiscal year 24-25 operating budget expenditures by category, just to show you how our budget categories are. And as you can imagine, personnel is our largest category citywide. It makes up 45.4% of our expenditure budget, operating expenditure budget. Contract services makes up about 26% of our budget. Commodities and operating capital outlay, like vehicles and equipment, make up about 11 or 12% of our budget. And debt service, which is principal and interest payments on our outstanding debt, that makes up about 16.4% of our budget. And this is the operating
Tanya, before
budget.
you leave that slide, let me remind the fellow commissioners here if they want to interrupt you with a question at any point, because you're going through a lot of information very, very quickly. But if any of you have any questions, just press your request to speak button. And for Jim, you on the phone there, just shout out to us if you have a question. But this is an important summary slide to be looking at, because this is the, whatever it is, 500 and some odd million dollars that comprises the operating budget. Go ahead.
Okay, now again, this is current year budget, so when we bring the proposed 25-26 budget to you, some of these percentages will change. However, this is a good, kind of summary of what our operating budget looks like, split out into those categories. And I know, next slide. I know this is rather small, but this is the operating budget broken out by fund. As we all understand, in government accounting, we account for everything in funds because we need to show how we spend the money that we collect to ensure that we're spending it the way that it's meant to be spent. So I know it might be hard for you to see, but the general fund is our largest operating fund. And aside from the general fund, the next largest operating fund is our water and sewer fund. And then we have special program funds, operating grants funds. We have our tourism development fund. Our tourism development fund is the 5% bed tax that we collect, that we spend on destination marketing and non-destination marketing tourism type events. So that's our tourism development fund. Our transportation fund is the fund that collects the 0.2% transportation sales tax, and also the highway user revenue fund, which is the state gas tax. So those two are the primary taxes in the transportation fund, which is then used for our transportation operations and street and transportation capital improvements as well. We also have our debt service fund, which is the fund that collects our secondary property taxes and also houses all the revenues that we use to pay our bond debt and some of our revenue debt. And then, of course, we have like I said, the largest fund is our water sewer fund. We also have our solid waste fund. And then we have some internal service funds like our healthcare self-insurance fund. The city is self-insured for healthcare and also self-insured for commercial liability and workers' comp. And so we have our healthcare self-insurance fund and our risk management fund as well. And then we also have a fleet management fund that manages and operates the city's fleet. And we have some minor funds like our stadium fund and our airport fund. So those are pretty much all the funds that we have that shows where the money, how we collect our money, and how we spend our money. Next slide.
Sonia, I have a question
Yes.
from Commissioner Newman.
Hi, Sonia. Question, what portion of the total pie is constrained by referenda where the monies are dedicated into that color of the pie chart versus what portion is discretionary according to what the council might set forth as objectives?
Okay. Most of the discretionary, if not all of the discretionary funds are in the general fund. Everything else is either restricted for the purpose of the revenue or required to be spent on the operations for various reasons.
Thank you.
I also have a question from Commissioner Carla.
Yes, Sonia, where in the two pie charts does the police and fire pay down? I can never remember the acronym fit.
Yes. So police and fire is primarily in the general fund. However, police and fire also has operations in restricted funds because some restricted revenues we receive are dedicated to police and fire operations. So to the extent that their revenues are restricted, then it's in one of the restricted funds. For example, we have the Prop 207 funds that are required by state law to be used for public safety personnel only. And so because it's restricted for public safety personnel, that money that we collect from the Prop 207 money goes into a special programs fund and is used for just that purpose that it's restricted for.
I apologize if I wasn't clear enough. I'm talking about, I know that you're trying to increase every year in the budget the amount you pay down on their PS.
Pension?
Yes, that one.
Yes. So our pay down of the pension will be from the general fund.
General fund. Okay, thank you.
And another question from me, if I can follow the kaleidoscope of colors correctly, is the Tourism Development Fund, is that the $22 million piece at the bottom of the pie chart?
That is correct.
And why is that 22 rather than whatever, 35 or whatever comes into that fund?
So this is the expenditure, not the revenues.
So that means we are under expending the revenues of that fund, is that what?
That is correct. So we do have some fund balance that we have in the fund. However, our proposed budget, we do have a plan to spend down that fund balance. But that is the expenditure number versus the revenue number.
And so you said in the plan, we do have a strategy to use the money. Why would that not be an expenditure that's shown?
This does not show this is this current year's expenditure budget. It doesn't include the reserves or contingencies in it. And
So that it is underspent in this particular year.
for this year, correct.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide. And this is the same operating budget. So basically, the last 3 slides, I've shown you the operating budget by category, and then I showed you the operating budget by fund, and this is the operating budget by department division. As you can see, police has the largest budget, followed by public works, water and wastewater department, community services, fire, our administrative services, which is IT, communications, government relations, and human resources. And then we have community and economic development, our charter offices, and some other smaller departments.
Sonia, to Carla's question then, with the far left bar, police and fire, well, far left and fifth bar in, with those two, if you made a special payment for their pension obligations, would that raise that bar? In other words, this is not just normal operating costs, this is extraordinary costs if you had made a payment.
So for fiscal year 24-25, we did not budget any extra pension payments. So the 143 is the operating budget for the police department. However, it may probably include some one-time items in there. That's the total operating budget for the police department for this fiscal year, and it may include some one-time items.
So I think to your point, if they made a payment in the past or in the future, if they made a special payment, it goes into that bar.
That is correct. Any other questions? Okay, next slide. So now moving on to revenues. This is the, again, this fiscal year, our revenues by category. As you can see, the local sales tax revenues is our largest category at 30%. And the fees and charges is the next largest category at 37%. The reason why the fees and charges are so large is because it's the water and sewer and solid waste, our utility fees and charges for those functions. And then the next largest bucket are our, we have a lot of other revenues like intergovernmental revenues and grants. We have state shared revenues, and we also have property taxes. Any questions here?
I think, again, to make sure people understand the bed tax, where it's going, is that in the other revenues?
That is correct. It's in the other revenues.
And in this budget, it accounts for $36 million or some number like that. Roughly $36 million in this budget.
Yeah, that's about right. Or maybe a little less, 35, 36, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so now, next slide. So again, I'm sorry for how small this is, but this is the revenue budget by fund. As you can see, most of our taxes, which is the 1.1% of our 1.75% sales tax, goes into the general fund. About half of our property tax goes into the general fund. Most of our state share goes into the general fund. The only state share that doesn't go into our general fund is the state gas tax, the highway user revenues. So our general fund has the bulk of those revenues. And water and sewer, as we talked about earlier, is the other larger operating fund that has mainly fees and charges. And then, let's see. So you can see, Chairman Smith, you can see that the Tourism Development Fund is the dark green, and it does say 36 million right there. So. Okay, any questions? Okay, so next slide. This is, I think, the last slide for this section. I just wanted to share with you the city's capital budget for this fiscal year. Majority of our capital budget is in our water and sewer infrastructure. Over 460 million of that is in our water and sewer capital projects. The next largest bucket is the transportation projects. One of the reasons the transportation capital project is so large is because we have the arterial life cycle program where the city pays 30% and the county pays the 70%, but we account for the entire project, the 100%, in our capital budget because we get reimbursed for the 70%, so the whole cost of it is in our budget. And then we have our service facilities, our community facilities, public safety, some drainage, flood control projects, and a little bit in the preservation as well.
I know because I looked ahead, I don't see a slide for the money that comes into the capital program. Can you at some point provide us that, or may have I missed it? Do you have something that shows the revenues that pay for these expenses?
Yes, I plan to provide you that in March when we go over the capital improvement plan or capital budget for this coming fiscal year. But just real quickly, for water and sewer, the capital projects are funded by development impact fees, water sewer rates, and debt, which is then repaid with capital, with rates and fees and impact fees. So primarily, that's your funding source for water and sewer projects. For the transportation projects, your funding source will be the 0.2 transportation sales tax, the 0.1 transportation sales tax, and grants is your primary source for those improvements. And for service, there's a Bond 2019 program that is funding a variety of projects within our service facilities, community facilities, and public safety. But if not for the Bond 2019 funds, a lot of the community facilities, service facilities, public safety, capital improvement projects are funded by the general fund. With the drainage flood control projects, that's funded by our stormwater fee and also the flood control district. So we partner with the flood control district and they provide funding for us for that. The preserve, that would be funded by the remaining 0.15 preserve tax. So any capital improvements will be funded by that.
Okay, I also have questions first from Commissioner Carla.
Well,
Actually, I have two questions, but Commissioner Newman had pushed first, if you
are you
want.
making caffeinated or decaffeinated?
She's been preempted by Commissioner Newman.
Down in the drawer in front of you.
I seem to have trouble pressing the button, right? So, just a quick question, a clarifying, thank you, though. Thank you, Carla. Clarifying question, go back to the pie charts for revenue and operating budget. I just did a quick add up, and the difference between those two pie charts is roughly $200 million, give or take. Is that $200 million then going to capital projects? Is that how it's allocated? And then do you have other funds that are dedicated to that? Is that, just make sure I understand it correctly?
Yeah,
Yes, Commissioner.
that's the only one. I mean, you can
Newman.
you can make any tea you want.
Yes, Commissioner Newman, that is correct. So we typically take the excess of our revenues over expenditures, especially in the general fund, to fund our capital projects and or to fund the PSPRS pension pay down.
Okay.
In the other funds, it depends on what the fund and revenue is restricted for. If it's restricted for certain expenditures, it has to stay in that fund for those expenditures. So in some cases, it might be that the department is accumulating some of those funds for a larger expense in the next 2 or 3 years. Basically, you know, we operate in terms of a long-term operating plan. Just because we collected the money this year, it may not be spent all this year. So for example, if we're working on a master plan, we might be taking 2-3 years to develop that master plan, and the funds collected for the master plan may take 2-3 years to be spent.
Okay. So a follow-up to that, if you look at, I understand you're routing money to the priorities. However, how is that, where's the push and pull on the expense side versus the capital side to say you want to have a balanced budget, but you might have stronger needs over here? Is that set by council, or is that set by your staff? How is that, or by others in the administration? How is that set? Because you have to, there's only so much money, so you have to decide what's more important and prioritize that, correct?
Right. So if we want to go back to slide 3. So it's part of this process where it starts out with a department request where you're saying, you know, there's typically more requests than there is revenues for to support those requests. And as we internally review that with the city manager and the executive team and the departments, that's where we prioritize and whether this expenditure stays in and how we're going to pay for it versus that expenditure, we have no funding for it. And there is definitely that balancing act where when we bring a proposed budget to you, it's what we believe we can fund that is aligned with the council priorities and department goals, and there will be a pretty big list of things that we've kicked out because there's no funding for. And then we can share that list with you as well as all the things that were requested by the departments that were removed because there's not enough funding for it.
Thank you.
And now Commissioner Carla.
Okay, yeah, and I do have 2 questions, like I said, and this is perfect. If you can go back to slide 2, please, for my first question.
I'm sorry, slide
2.
Oh,
You're
slide
on 3
2?
now, so. I had a citizen ask me, are you all going to be talking about how they actually do the financial strategies, you know, like why they fund something in a certain way? And that's not really in our purview, is it? We're more a budget review?
Yeah, I guess, Commissioner Carla, to the extent that you need to review the budget and to the extent that we have financial strategies in order to put that budget together, we can definitely share that with you.
Okay. But it's not our job to make recommendations on how you fund certain things.
Maybe I'll answer this question this way. A lot of our revenues are restricted.
Okay.
So the recommendations you make could be, we don't want to fund something. We don't think that that's a good use of those revenues. And we don't think that that's a good even if it's restricted. So that could be a recommendation.
Okay, thank you. And then the final question had to do with all of those revenues coming in, and specifically you talked about the county 70% on transportation. Is the federal freeze that's going on certain infrastructure projects or, certain projects, is that going to affect money we have coming in, or do we know yet?
We do not know. The 70% for the ALCP, that is not federal money, that is county money, so that will not be frozen. Other than that, I do understand that the memo to freeze the federal funds has been rescinded, but I'm not sure if we do have about, I think the last time we looked, we have about 50 million in grants that's been awarded and outstanding, so some of that funds, depending on where that direction goes from the federal government, we don't know.
Okay, thank you.
I have no
Chairman
other
Smith, if I
questions.
could, quick question. Just one last question. I was just curious, as you develop the budget year over year, if you could outline what you think defines success. I'm just curious, what is a good budget process versus something that's less successful? I'm just trying to understand the theology, I guess, a little bit about how you personally define success through a budget process.
Commissioner Ransco, if I can repeat your question, you are asking how we define success through the budget process?
Correct. I'm just trying to understand, you have a team and there's a lot of inputs, and I guess I'm just curious, how does one at the end of that process, one, you win an award 30 years in a row, so that's a compliment to the process that you guys follow. But I just am curious, you personally, what you view as success in that process.
Yes, okay. So I think to answer that question is a successful end product of a budget would be that the budget aligns with council priorities and goals, and it meets our citizens' needs, that we are providing, that the budget provides the core services and all the interests of our community and funds our department and makes sure that we have healthy departments that can serve our communities, make sure that we have the rates and fees to fund those areas of needs, like our water, sewer rates and fees. And that we also have a balanced budget so that we are not structurally imbalanced, where we are spending more than our revenues can support over time, that we're not over leveraging, that we're not issuing too much debt, and that we're not having to dip into our reserves, that we maintain healthy reserves. And at the end of the day, the budget is supporting and maintaining our strong AAA bond rating.
Thank you.
I think we have no other questions.
Okay, I think that was my last slide for item 5. So we can okay.
And I think for the benefit of everybody, you have finished item 5, which is the overview of the city's budget components. And if no one has any other questions, we'll proceed to item 6, which is to approve the scope of work and approach. It's not our approval, but I guess we do it. We are asking for our approval of the scope of work. All right, proceed.
Next slide. So the objective of this item is for the commission to discuss and consider the scope of work and approach and provide direction to staff. As you saw in the previous presentation, there are a lot of components and steps to our budget process. We can certainly provide a lot of information on every single step we go through. There's also a lot of funds and a lot of departments, a lot of categories that we can certainly dive into to help the commission review and approve the budget. So next slide. So kind of going over again the need, next slide. So kind of going over the need to have the commission discuss the scope and provide direction to staff is, again, we have a very compressed timeline this year with the Budget Review Commission being formed and effective today. We have the budget release planned for April 3rd, and we have to present the budget to council on May 6th in order to have it adopted by June 20th with all the posting and public hearing requirements that we have. So we have a very short amount of time to get the commission up to speed and understanding all the issues and get you through the review of the budget so that it is ready for council review. Next slide, and just to kind of go over again, usually a standard process for a budget review committee or commission that's been, you know, kind of doing this for multiple years is we would bring to you a short not short, but a presentation that goes something like this. We would present to you the financial policies governing the budget each year. We would talk about the organizational goals and priorities that's included in the budget that's being proposed. We would then discuss the economic trends, forecasts, and any major drivers of revenue and expenditure assumptions and projections. We would then provide to you presentations on revenue and expenditures, especially over the 5 years for the general fund, our primary operating fund, to show you that we're, structurally balanced. Next slide. The bulk of the presentations would come from the departments in a typical budget review presentation where individual departments would present their expenditure and program requests, including any personnel requests or other major drivers of expenditures. We would then also present any new capital project requests and changes to existing approved projects and any other key or significant aspects of a proposed budget. So these 7 items would be a typical budget review presentation that staff would bring to you maybe over 2 days or 3 days of budget review deliberations. However, given that this is a new budget committee, we understand that there's a lot of additional information that we anticipate that we would need to provide to get you guys, up to speed and to allow you to fully understand how the city's financial process or plan works. So we are prepared for that. It's just that, again, we have a very compressed timeline, so we would like to ask the commission to determine what areas you'd like to direct staff for presentation and how you would like to receive this information so we can get through the budget review process this year. So next slide. Again, these are all the different components of...
If I can interrupt, go back
sorry.
to the 1 through 7, and others can weigh in on this, but I think in the compression of time, we may abbreviate some of these portions here. Number 3, for example, economic trends, forecasts, and other major drivers. We will want to know what went into the thinking for the current budget, but not probably spend a lot of time on that. And the following item, revenues and expenditures on the 5-year forecast, is again probably something we'll not spend a lot of time on. That's not to say that we won't be focused and concerned about the sustainability of the budget. So if you have some items of revenue and expenditure that are significant one-time items, we'll need to be alerted to that, but we're not so much interested in this 10 seconds at looking at the 5-year forecast. And then finally, I would say in terms of individual department presentations, we'll be very selective about those and how we do that, because it's,
Yes.
we simply won't have time to hear about your budget, Sonia. So there may be several smaller departments that we'll want to skip by. I don't know whether the other, and I guess I would say on the new capital projects, I'm not sure that our interest is going to be, or our value in reporting to the council is going to be in talking about, on number 6, new capital projects, as much as talking about the process for capital projects and how they come about, and more importantly, where the points are that they go south on us, and how might we plug those leaks, if you will. So we'll be judicious about what capital projects we actually look at. I don't know whether others have comments on this other than what I'm saying, but just trying to figure out how we squeeze all this into the compressed amount of time we have. Commissioner Newman.
Yeah, just to add on to that, in looking at, we thank you for the book on capital planning, and I looked through the budget, and it seems like some of the largest items, understanding how contingency and other items are added up into that, and because if we have a lot of projects, I mean, it's a very thick book, if we have a lot of projects and they all have their own contingency, but the probability of using that contingency is, you know, something less than that. It seems like we ought to strive for a pooled contingency thinking, and how much do we really use? And so understanding how much we've dipped into contingency and when, because that reserves a lot in the budget. And as we said before, if what's the quote-unquote profit from revenue minus operating expenses put into the capital plan, then all that contingency eats that up. If you relieve some of that because realistically you're not going to use it, it seems like that allows other things that people want funded get funded. So and we're not really giving up anything by just managing it that way. So I think with staff understanding scope, cost, schedule, and contingency planning and how that's done would be helpful for the largest items, and kind of use a 80-20 rule. You know, you don't need to go through every single item, but the biggest items I think would be helpful to relieve some of that and take pressure off the budget, so then everybody, as much as possible, can get what they want.
So I think Commissioner Newman is doubling down on the idea that we want to know the process more than the specific projects. Commissioner Carlin.
Yes, thank you. I had two things. First, for the chair, I know you had said earlier in our process that you were going to meet with council members and ask what their priorities were, and if that could be shared with us, because that can help give us an idea. Because what I'm hearing from fellow citizens is everybody's keying on the cost overruns on the 2019 bond projects. And I think that ties back to what you all were just talking about, understanding the process so we understand how that happened. So.
To respond, yes, I have met with the mayor and council members. A couple of them have still not been able to schedule, in part because their appointee is not available. But that was an objective, and I've done it as completely as we can at this moment. And I was, to your second point, can I share them? Yes, I can share their collective thoughts. I was going to do that more under item 7 of our agenda, when we actually try to identify specific possible future agenda items. And if that's not complete enough when we get there, we'll circle back. I guess you left off on this slide, so pick it up there, if you will.
Yes, so next slide. So this slide shows you all the funds that we have, and we wanted to get the commissioner's direction on if there's any specific funds you want more information on, or any specific information on, or if there's any funds that maybe you don't want to focus on. So let me just read out loud all the different funds. We have the general fund, the ambulance fund, special programs, which are our special revenues that are dedicated to specific uses. grants fund, which are our operating grants, not our capital grants. Stadium fund, which is our stadium here. The preserve tax fund, that is the remaining 0.15% preserve tax that is for land acquisition and improvements. The transportation fund, as I said earlier, that is the 0.2% transportation sales tax and state shared highway gas tax. Our tourism development fund, which includes our destination marketing, that is the 5% bed tax. And then we have several new park and preserve tax funds, which is the new funds that we will create for this upcoming budget for the 0.15% Prop 490 taxes that we will collect. And then over to the right, we have on the enterprise fund side, we have our water sewer fund, we have our solid waste fund, and we have our aviation, which is our airport fund. And then moving down to the left, below other funds, we have our debt service funds, and we have our street light district fund. And then the internal service funds, we have our healthcare self-insurance fund, our fleet management fund, our fleet replacement fund, and our risk management fund.
I don't know what the others may think, Carla, but I think most of our interest is going to be in the, if you will, in the upper left-hand quadrant of this chart. The enterprise funds, of course, are big in dollar amount and important to the city, but I don't think they're areas that we're going to focus on this time around. And the same can be said for street lights and internal service funds and so on. So I think our interest is going to be in the upper left-hand quadrant. Anyone else has an opinion, they can share that. Seeing none, go ahead.
So can I clarify that?
I guess I should say, Jim, you're still on the phone, and you're just going to have to shout if you want to talk on something, so chime in.
I will do that. Thank you.
Thanks.
So can I clarify that the direction to staff is to bring back presentations focused on the governmental funds and not on the enterprise funds, internal service funds, or other funds? Or would you still like some kind of presentation on those, but just maybe more high level, or maybe we don't have time for those this year and we would just focus on those governmental funds?
In my opinion, we certainly will focus on the governmental funds, and maybe the others are, if we have the luxury of time. You know, they're certainly important to the city, as I said, but it's not what I think any of us are hearing in the community as areas of keen interest in the budget.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Carla wants to either agree or disagree.
Well, actually, I agree with what you identified, but I would like to add a caveat. If the treasurer sees something in one of those other funds that she thinks it's very important for us to look at, I mean, I think we should. Or if a council person has identified that something in one of those other funds is important, then I think we should be open to looking at it.
Thank you. Next slide. I know this is really small, so I'll read it to you. I wanted to put it all on one slide, but these are all our departments and our divisions, and so again, I would like to get the commissioner's input and direction to staff as to maybe which department division you'd like us to present for you versus not, or maybe at a more high level, or maybe at a deeper level. So we have, these are our department divisions in our budget. We have mayor and council, police, fire, economic development, planning and development, tourism and events, McCormick-Stillman Railroad Park, Westworld, Scottsdale Stadium, library, human services, community assistance, parks and recreation, preserve management, capital project management, facilities management, city manager, the charter officers, the city attorney, city treasurer, city clerk, city auditors, city court, government relations, communications, information technology, human resources, fleet management, solid waste, transportation and streets, water resources, which is our water and sewer department, and aviation.
Well, again, I'll break the silence and say I think most of the areas we're interested in on the left-hand column of this chart. And, you know, if I had to pick some that are less on people's radar screens, certainly the McCormick-Stillman Railroad Park. Lovely park, but I don't think we have any questions about it. Westworld, on the other hand, a lovely park, and we probably have a lot of questions on it. So they're mostly on the left-hand side here, and probably, and I'll speak for perhaps some of the commissioners here, but saying that the capital project management, the next to the last one on the left-hand chart, is one of keen interest for everybody. I'm going to have Commissioner Schweiker lead in, I should say Vice Chair Schweiker.
Yeah, the one on the right-hand side that I think we probably want to know some about is transportation and streets, because I hear a lot from people about that. So I think that's one we should focus in on also.
Commissioner Newman.
Just a general comment, not necessarily a particular category, but Sonia, the categories that have a particular opportunity or impact on pension and debt, I think would be of interest to understand, you know, because obviously you want to allocate your funds to pay down, make sure pensions are funded and pay down debt wherever possible, but where are those funds that are either in reserve or that are fungible to be able to pay those things down? I think being able to know where those levers are would be helpful.
Yeah, so all the pension payments will be police and fire. And as far as debt is concerned, it's a lot of the debt proposed for the upcoming years will be water and sewer.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think to the staff, when we look at pensions, you know, the hot buttons, of course, are the PSPRS for the police and fire, public safety individuals, but don't ignore the other as well. I know we don't have the chance to make prepayments on it because it's a commingled plan, but nevertheless, let's look at the order of magnitude of the whole pension liability. Does anyone else have any comments on this package in its entirety? I think I will make one other comment. Since it's on the left-hand side, it is obviously an area that we'll be talking about, but tourism and events, I think we'll want to understand how we're making that discrete pile of money work the best for us and in compliance with the citizens' directions. If there are no other questions or speaker requests, including Commissioner Ransko on the phone, let's move on to item number 7.
Chair Smith, can I just repeat and confirm the direction of the commission? So you would like staff to bring back the budget requests and budget presentations on all the departments on the left side and the transportation and street on the right side, but and delete the McCormick-Stillman Railroad Park.
Well, I really meant more than just that. I mean, you can delete mayor and council, I think. We don't need to be looking at the budgets of our bosses. And I don't know that anybody has an area of particular interest in the stadium, the library, human services. I haven't heard a lot in that regard.
Stadium.
Does anyone else here have guidance? Seeing none, we'll say that that's the list for now, but keep it open. We will obviously have this open to make changes in the future if we
Mr. Chair?
find something.
If-
Yes.
And again, just to introduce myself to the commission, Greg Caton, interim city manager. What I might suggest we could, at the pleasure of the commission, it's a pretty long list on the left. We might bring them in ordering of our suggested area for opportunity and kind of prioritize them, if you will. For example, police and fire, because a lot of dollars are in that area. The pension that I've heard several times today. And maybe just hypothetically, last on the list might be community assistance, for example. And so again, I might suggest that we could assist in prioritizing based upon any further direction. We'll bring them forward with what we might suggest how you spend some of the time.
And I think we would welcome your suggestions. You know, the issues that are inherent in some of these. You will know from just the conversations that you've heard and will hear that planning and development will be an item that the commissioners, I think, want to better understand so they can advise council. As Commissioner Schweiker mentioned, also the transportation and streets and maybe just capital management generally will be an area of priority, but we will defer to your judgment on other areas. Commissioner Carla.
Yes, what City Manager Caton said, I agree with it in principle, but I did have a question about community assistance. Facing what's happening at a federal level, won't they be the one most affected by some of those cuts and freezes if those really do go through?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Carla, yes, actually, you're spot on. I believe the CDBGA, Community Development Block Grant would be an excellent example of us keeping an eye on what's coming out of the federal government and the pause or non-pause. And so I think what we can do in certain areas like that is propose kind of a scale of potential risk, just for sake of a measure of some of those dollars. And you've keyed in on an area that is probably on the short list and probably top couple for some grants. I would think maybe some in our first responders or public safety might be on that short list as well. So maybe that's an area where we dive a little deeper for areas of risk for coming years that we have significant revenue streams and they could be in jeopardy.
Right, and I would appreciate that because, you know, Paiute Neighborhood Center does great work, and I can imagine they're all a tad nervous right now. So we need to understand, and I think in making recommendations to council, if this money does go away, do we need to look elsewhere in the general fund to say, do we still support these programs? Because they're so critical to our community.
Point well taken.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no other comments, we'll go to item 7 now. Item 7 is where you have asked us to share some of our hot buttons, if you will, or more specifically, the issues that we have gleaned from talking to our appointed council members or others in the community. Does anybody want to lead off this discussion? Hearing a bevy of support, let me lead off then with, oh, Commissioner Carla would like to talk.
I'm not gonna start with pointing them out, because I would like to hear the council priorities you've learned first. But I would ask us to look at it within the framework of realizing, because of the compressed time frame, that we have to really winnow down the list and prioritize, but understanding that we could also, at the end of recommendations to council, say, in the next budget cycle, we feel A, B, C, and D really need to be looked at. So we're not permanently, saying that's not important. We're just saying not this cycle because of the compressed time frame. And that way we have a knowledge of these are concerning also. So that's just a suggestion.
And I think it's a good suggestion, because we do realize that we will not be able to look at everything by April 26 or whatever. And some of the things that come across our table, we may decide we're going to recommend to the council that they direct us in the remaining months of calendar 2025 to look at revenues or some expense item or whatever, and we will take a deeper look, yes. Commissioner Newman.
I'd just like to concur with what Commissioner Carla said. And, I had mentioned pensions, debt, and then understanding capital plan. I think those are my priorities in that, because I look at it as where are the biggest dollars in the short amount of time we have. So where are those areas? And then beyond that, the city council can give direction as to priority. But then beyond that, double-clicking into various aspects. And I think there is opportunity there. You've got a great system set up. You've walked us through it. And thank you for all your work. But as the commission goes on, we can certainly dig down and have some special objectives to have continuous improvement all the way down that list that you have. Thank you.
Commissioner Schweiger.
And I agree with what I'm hearing. I think that what we look at for the next fiscal year will be different than what we're looking at this year, just because of the short amount of time we have. So I'm concurring with what I've been hearing.
Is the Elmo machine working? Could I put something on there? Do you know?
Chair Smith, Sherry Scott from the legal department. I believe it is working.
We have the expert here to do it. When in doubt, call 911. And I put this up here not as a specific directive, but I tried to summarize some of the discussions that I had with members of council. And I apologize, they're not even particularly in order of priority, except, of course, for the first one. There is a concern among all of them to look at the capital budget or CapEx program, however you call it, and to understand how these items are determined by the planning department, and is there a better way to guesstimate the projects coming forward? How are they funded? And a concern about what I call the variable overhead, or really it's the variable overhead, which says if a project escalates, then the city's overhead charge escalates right along with it percentage-wise. These were just some of the issues that I heard from council members. Probably legitimately number two in terms of importance is sustainability. Going to a question that Commissioner Newman raised about the pensions. What are they? How are they funded? And just generally understanding that long-term liability and how it affects our sustainability. On maintenance and repair, a similar concern that we may be balancing budgets by kicking the can down the road and deferring maintenance and repair, which will eventually catch up to us. And the item under expense recovery is just a concern with whether we have adequate expense recovery for some of the services that we provide on a, to specific events or to specific areas. Maybe it's police protection at the TPC. I use this as an example, and I know there we do have an expense recovery model. But as we provide these services on an escalating basis, do they impair our sustainability? Someone earlier raised the question, perhaps Commissioner Newman earlier, about the adequacy of our reserves. How are they determined? Do we have a percent of revenues or a percent of anything that we try to retain in reserves, and then how are they used? I know that we have strong reserves now, but I think we're interested in knowing how did we get strong reserves, and are they strong, or should they be stronger, and under what circumstances do we use them? In the item 4 on the list, the quality of the funding, what the heck am I talking about there? Quality of life funding, those things that tourism and arts and culture and whatever, do we have those as, one council member said, you know, it should be a line item. Another council member said it should be a litmus test that we apply to anything that we do here. Is what's it doing to our quality of life? I don't know how you translate that into an action item, but I'm just, don't shoot the messenger here. Item 5 just is a broad-based question about personnel, the FTEs. We have 2,700 FTEs. How does that compare with what we had in the past? Do we have, is there a way of controlling FTEs in a general sense? Do we have a way of knowing what our FTEs should be in terms of count? Do we have efficiency programs that say, I needed 2,700 last year, but I only need 2,600 this year because of new efficiencies that I've found in the operation? And then, of course, the components of compensation, wages, benefits, pensions, and how those have changed over time. And item 6 is a broad array of things related to the sales tax component. We've talked about, it has food tax in there. We've talked about the old 1.5 preserve tax. We've talked about the 0.1 for the ALCP tax. So we have both temporary and permanent needs, and sometimes we don't align the temporary or the permanent needs with funding by permanent taxes. And again, item F on that list includes sustainability. Are these taxes enough to sustain the city? And I would guess that item 6, in terms of all these sales tax items, is something we will not accomplish between now and April. It is perhaps a longer term assignment that the council will give us to look at the adequacy of sales tax, whether we should reform the whole package. And in the bed tax, some people have expressed concern about the 5% that we have dedicated to downtown marketing and the portion that is available in the bed tax for capital commitments. That was the reason for my question earlier. If we're bringing in $36 million in bed tax and only spending 22 on operations, I'm missing something there. So, and then finally, long-term visioning, again, is probably not within our purview, but some of the council members expressed concern that we need a long-term vision, something that contemplates the population of the city and, you know, how big can we accommodate growing. That, to your question, Carla, was the aggregate feedback of that I got from council members, and we'll tackle some, but not all on that list for sure. Anyone else want to chime in? Commissioner Carlin.
Yeah, thank you very much, and can we each get a copy of that list, please?
No,
Because
no, it's private.
it's very enlightening to look at some of that. And I'm right there with Commissioner Newman on the pensions and going into that, and also the capital. I just think we're going to have to be very realistic, because there's nothing that's not important on this list. But we're just going to have to be realistic about time and prioritizing. And I'm not sure if we're supposed to vote on scope of work tonight, what do you want us to get to?
Well, it is a daunting list. It's probably more daunting for the mayor than it is for us because it all comes home to roost for the council on wrestling these issues, but it shows the diversity and the breadth of issues that council is concerned about, each member in their own way. In terms of direction to staff, I think we've said several times tonight that we for sure want to focus on item 1, the capital process and understanding. And that's, I think, what people are hearing from the community so much, maybe because, you know, others are alerting them to it, I don't know, but that's the visibility that they see when their project is overrunning. Commissioner Newman, weigh in.
With respect to capital budget, and we haven't really talked about what are the things that can derail once you put a plan out there immediately. It's wrong, and you got to make changes to it because reality hits, and especially in capital budgeting. So, where are we so far this year on capital budgets? Because I've seen where capital will come back and we need more because the project went this direction or that direction, and now council has to find funds somewhere to do this. But what process do we have in place to identify either being on budget or under budget where funds can be reallocated? I don't even know what flexibility there is there, but to me, that's out of that list, that's the one derailer, because you've got a $1.1 billion capital budget, divided by 5, that's $200 million. If you're off by 10, 20%, that's $40 million. So that's a big number against the general fund, where it has to come from somewhere if you've got a project that's ongoing or whatever. So what processes do we have in place to identify those on a quarterly or monthly basis so that you don't have surprises in the current year? So I guess it's a question for Sonia, but that would be something I think would be helpful to know, so your plan isn't dead on arrival as soon as you get done in April because of some derailer.
Yeah, absolutely, Commissioner Newman, that's a very good question. We do definitely balance the budget and make sure that there is funding for the capital budget before we put it in there. But that is a lengthier discussion that we do plan to bring back. Now that is a specific interest and direction from the commission. We will prepare all the necessary information and details to help you understand how we do that.
And my question is more tactical than it is the long-term plan, because it's where are we now on capital and our projects under budget or over budget now, and then what does that mean to the current budget that you're approving? That's the question there. I haven't seen anything on that, but I think that's a relevant question. So our capital budget process is driven by how much funding we have for those capital projects. So to the extent that if capital projects have increased in cost, then something needs to come off the list, because we can only fund the ability to fund X number of projects, X amount of projects. Yeah, and my question really gets to executing the current year budget, and capital projects play a big role in that. And so, what's our strength at being able to deliver the number this quarter of cash flow that we said what we would do, and delivering on that as to what's being paid to contractors and everything, so that the budget stays intact. That's really my question there. But we don't have to answer it here, but certainly I've seen the surprises come to council, and then obviously somebody has to find money somewhere.
Right, and excellent point, and we will definitely need the city engineer to help answer that question at a later meeting, but we definitely understand that question, and we will bring that back to you.
Mr. Chair, if I may just add to this conversation, I think Commissioner, you've highlighted, I think, two very distinct issues, one of which is a budget or a capital project. Once a budget has been established, within a current year. And from my early estimation, that process is extremely tight. I think where we've seen most of the challenges is in a projection or an estimation for a project in the future. Case in point, the 2019, which was an estimate of projects that were going to happen over a number of years, were really put together around 2016, 2017, from my understanding. As we get here to 2025, and those projects are now starting to roll out, that cost estimate is extremely different than what was identified in a 2017. And also two terms in my mind that I draw a distinction between: one, overruns, which is more of a current year situation in my mind of using that terminology, and then cost escalation. We've seen significant cost escalation within our estimated, engineers' estimate, other estimated cost of projects. So I think you've hit on something that we can spend some time on, understanding some strengths and some weaknesses within our system to address those issues.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's a tactical and a strategic question at the same time in terms of managing that, and it depends on the drivers. But it ought to be an open environment to be able to say, here's scope, cost, schedule, and where we stand on that, and just working together to arrive at something that works for everybody. Thanks.
So Sonia, I think, or Greg, I think the takeaway is that besides what we've listed up there, he's really asking what are the safeguards that we have that either alert us that a project is going south so we can stop it, or, you know, at least not have it be a surprise to everybody. Commissioner Schweiker.
Yes, and I think there's even some challenges on the short term this year with what we're doing for the current budget, because I see some of these things up here that I know are under threat from the legislature. You know, we have food tax up there. That may be taken out of our hands. The legislature may very well get rid of the food tax. We know that state shared revenue may be under threat because the state doesn't look like it's going to have a balanced budget this year. So I think some of those moving parts, you really need to keep us informed on that as you hear what's going on.
Commissioner Ransko on the phone, do you have any comments you'd care to share?
No, I don't have any new comments. I think the commission has said a lot of the things I was thinking. There does seem to be a moment where there are some subjective allocations and subjective reallocations, and so I think I look forward to just kind of understanding the theory and the pros and the cons on where dollars are spent and sent. So I don't have anything substantive to add beyond that.
Thank you. Well, we look forward to seeing you in your seat the next time, so we welcome you.
I will be there.
Sonia, do you have anything else, or is that enough discussion to completely confuse matters for now?
Thank you, Chair Smith and Commissioners. I think that's enough direction for staff tonight or today.
With that, I think our next meeting is scheduled for 2 weeks from today, February 27. And obviously, any questions that come up. And can I have you, by the way, take charge of grabbing the schedule that I put on the Elmo and send it to the fellow commissioners here. And if there's no other business, we will clear the dais here for the next deliberation, if I have a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Motion
Second.
by Vice Chair Schweiker to adjourn, and
I'll second.
And Commissioner Seitz second. We are adjourned. And another council member showed up.